is the inside story at this time on Al Jazeera.
15 minutes past the hour, you're watching Al Jazeera. Our top stories. At least 70 people are thought to have been killed during demonstrations across Libya, and security forces in the city of Benghazi and many other towns in the eastern part of the country have left the streets. The people are calling for leader Muammar Gaddafi to step down. Security remains tight across Bahrain's capital after shots were fired on anti-government protesters on Friday. The wounded were then taken to the city's main Salmaniya hospital, where protesters have gathered outside, defying a ban on demonstrations in the country. In Yemen, at least 6 people have been killed during anti-government protests in the past 24 hours. Demonstrations have now gone on for 8 straight days, with calls for the president to resign growing louder. In Egypt, the ruling Supreme Council of the Armed Forces has said it will not tolerate any further strikes. The army statement was issued on Friday as millions filled the streets across the country to celebrate their revolution and to maintain pressure on the new military government to implement democratic reforms. Here's Rawia Rageh from Cairo's Liberation Square.
Draped in red, white and black, thousands of Egyptians come to Tahrir Square, this time not in protest, rather to mark their hard-won victory.
Contrary to the scenes of anger and frustration that lasted here in Tahrir Square for days before Hosni Mubarak stepped down, the mood this Friday is one of joy and celebrations, smiles everywhere.
And a tribute to the country's military, who even before the end of Mubarak's rule last week was hailed for not obstructing the pro-democracy movement. The military had asked Egyptians to stop their protests, but it did not prevent the gathering on Friday. Instead, Tahrir was surrounded by tanks and soldiers who searched people and regulated traffic. The gathering not only a victory march, but also a memorial to the 300+ people who lost their lives in the uprising. The highlight of the day, an appearance by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, one of Sunni Islam's most prominent clerics. In a heartfelt ceremony, he praised the revolution, the youth behind it, and the military, though he did make a direct request.
I call on the Egyptian army to liberate us from the government that Mubarak formed in his last days. We want a new government that does not include the old faces that remind people of poverty and misery.
But he also urged patience with the country's interim military leadership. The current cabinet was appointed by Mubarak before he stepped down. A reshuffle is expected in the coming few days.
I came here all the way from Upper Egypt because all I want is an end to corruption. We want this government changed. We don't want Mubarak's party members in power.
It is true that we need to be patient, but at the same time we need to remind the government and whoever is there that we are still in the streets. And we still have a lot of other demands that they need to pay attention to.
And until they see the country's 30-year emergency law lifted and the thousands of political prisoners released, many say they will keep the pressure. Rawia Rageh, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
The United States has vetoed a UN resolution to brand Israeli settlements illegal. The resolution had received backing from 14 out of 15 members, but was defeated. Instead, Washington has offered to support a weaker, non-binding presidential statement that rejects the legitimacy of Israel's settlements. It's prompted angry Palestinians to vow to reevaluate the entire Middle East peace process.
Our opposition to the resolution before this Council today should therefore not be misunderstood to mean we support settlement activity. On the contrary, we reject in the strongest terms the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlement activity. Unfortunately, this draft resolution risks hardening the positions of both sides. It could encourage the parties to stay out of negotiations, and if and when they did resume, to return to the Security Council whenever they reach an impasse.
Let's speak to AlJazeera's Kristen Saloumi in New York. Kristen, we just heard Susan Rice there giving us the U.S. position on this resolution in the UN Security Council. But I'm wondering, I mean, going in, let's look at the Palestinian view. Going in, did the Palestinians think that this resolution would pass?
The Palestinians knew exactly what they were in for going into this. For the last week, the United States has been trying to negotiate with them, doing everything they could to get them to not bring this resolution to a vote. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Ambassador Rice met with the Palestinian ambassador and other delegates, offered support, U.S. support for a weaker statement, which wouldn't have the same weight of law as a resolution, and also watered down the wording a bit in its description of the settlements. Instead of calling them illegal, calling them illegitimate. The Palestinians rejected that. Yesterday, there was a call from President Barack Obama to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, almost an hour on the phone, saying that there would be serious repercussions for the peace process if this vote went forward. But the Palestinians decided to go ahead anyway. They have their own concerns at home to be worried about. The way they saw it, the Middle East peace process is stalled and going nowhere. And from what the ambassador here said after the vote today, they felt like they were just trying to put on the record what so many countries have expressed, the fact that Israel needs to stop expanding settlements in Palestinian territories. And in fact, not only did all other members of the Security Council support this resolution, but there were dozens of countries who actually signed up to be co-sponsors of the resolution as well.
All right, and Kristen, with everything that's happening in the region and the street demonstrations we're seeing rocking countries right across the Arab world, the U.S. Has to be concerned about the fallout from all of this on the region.
Clearly, I think they are very concerned. Ambassador Rice came to AlJazeera and spoke, did a live interview with one of our anchors. She was making the rounds to other foreign media here at the United Nations to make the case for their vote, to explain why they made that vote, how they think the resolution would have hardened positions on both sides, could have obstructed the peace process, and actually served to increase settlement expansion instead of stop it. So I think they are very concerned about how this is going to play out in the rest of the world, but they're probably more concerned about domestic politics. There's been a lot of pressure on them here to veto this resolution. Yesterday, the House Republican majority leader, along with the Democratic leader of the House, came out with a rare joint statement calling on the Obama administration to veto this resolution. The elections, the next presidential elections, are less than 2 years away. Obama is already struggling with a Republican majority in the House.